The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. Hans Castorp, a young man of 23, stepped off the train at Davos Platz, his breath visible in the crisp alpine air. The year was 1907, and the journey from Hamburg had been long, the narrow-gauge railway winding through the Swiss mountains to this high, isolated place. He was here for a 3-week visit, nothing more, to see his cousin Joachim Ziemßen, who was recovering from tuberculosis at the international sanatorium Berghof. Hans, an engineer by training, was practical, unassuming, with a quiet curiosity and a fondness for cigars. He expected a brief respite, a pause before returning to his predictable life. Little did he know, the mountain would hold him for 7 years. The sanatorium, a sprawling white building perched above the valley, was a world unto itself. Hans was struck by its order and strangeness. The clatter of dining hall dishes, the faint smell of antiseptic, the muffled coughs echoing down corridors. Joachim, pale but disciplined, greeted him warmly, guiding him through the routines of the cure. Hours of rest on balconies, wrapped in blankets, breathing the thin, cold air. Hans noticed the patient's peculiar vitality, their feverish eyes and animated chatter, as if illness had sharpened their senses. The head physician, Dr. Behrens, a jovial man with a painter's flair, examined Hans, noting a slight fever but dismissing it as travel fatigue. 3 weeks, Hans thought, then back to the flatland. Yet the mountain began to work on him. At meals he sat with Joachim and a cast of eccentrics, Frau Stor, vulgar and gossipy, Herr Albin, who flaunted his suicidal melancholy, and the Russian Madame Chauchat, whose careless beauty, almond eyes, high cheekbones, and a habit of slamming doors drew Hans's gaze. Her presence stirred him, though he barely spoke to her. He felt a flush in his cheeks, a quickening pulse, and blamed the altitude. The sanatorium's rhythm, meals, rest cures, medical checks, lulled him into a dreamlike state. Time, he noticed, moved differently here, stretching and contracting like the bellows of an accordion. Weeks passed, and Hans's departure date loomed. But Dr. Behrens, after another examination, declared a shadow on his lung, a moist spot requiring treatment. Hans, oddly unalarmed, agreed to stay longer. Joachim, ever dutiful, accepted his cousin's decision, though his own condition showed little improvement. Hans settled into the sanatorium's routine, his flatland ambitions fading. He read books on biology and philosophy, marveling at the body's mysteries. The mountain's isolation, its detachment from the world below, began to feel like freedom. He grew closer to Settembrini, an Italian humanist who frequented the dining hall with grand speeches about progress, reason, and the triumph of the West. Settembrini, with his threadbare coat and eloquent gestures, saw himself as Hans's mentor, warning him against the sanatorium's seductive inertia. "Beware the East, my boy," he said, eyeing Madame Chauchat's table. Hans listened, charmed by Settembrini's fervor, but found his ideas abstract, unmoored from the visceral pull of the sanatorium. Madame Chauchat, Clavdia, became his obsession. Her laugh, her careless grace, her foreignness captivated him. He recalled a boyhood memory, Pribislav Hippe, a schoolmate with similar eyes, for whom he'd felt a shy, unspoken longing. Clavdia was Hippe reborn, a symbol of something deeper, untamed. At a carnival evening, emboldened by wine and the sanatorium's loosened rules, Hans spoke to her at last. In halting French, he poured out his heart, confessing his love, his fascination with her body, her illness, her being. She listened, amused, and left him with a fleeting touch, a promise of nothing. The next day, she departed for Dagestan, leaving Hans adrift. Months turned to years. Hans's illness, never severe, persisted as a pretext for staying. Joachim, desperate for purpose, left the sanatorium to join the military, only to return. His condition worsened. He died quietly, his soldierly discipline no match for the disease. Hans mourned, but the mountain dulled his grief, its timelessness swallowing all urgency. He wandered the slopes, pondering life, death, and the body's fragile machinery. Snowstorms trapped him indoors, where he debated with Settembrini and a new arrival, Naphta, a Jesuit with a razor-sharp mind and a penchant for paradox. Naphta's nihilism, his embrace of suffering, faith, and the irrational, clashed with Settembrini's optimism, and Hans, caught between them, felt both enlightened and lost. The sanatorium's population shifted. Clavdia returned, now with a companion, Mynheer Peperkorn, a Dutchman of immense presence and incoherent charisma. Peperkorn's vitality, his love of wine and gesture, overshadowed Hans's quiet passion for Clavdia. Yet Hans sensed her gaze on him, a silent acknowledgement of their carnival night. Peperkorn, aware of their connection, treated Hans with odd affection, as if they shared a secret. One night, after a rambling speech, Peperkorn took his own life, unable to bear his declining strength. Clavdia left again, and Hans remained, tethered to the mountain's spell. Years blurred. Hans, now 30, was no longer the naive engineer. The sanatorium had reshaped him, its air filling his lungs with questions about love, death, and time. Settembrini and Naphta's debates grew fiercer, culminating in a duel. Settembrini's refusal to fire, Naphta's self-inflicted death. Hans watched, detached, as if the mountain had drained him of judgment. The world beyond stirred. Rumors of war, of nations arming, reached even this remote peak. In 1914, the Great War erupted. The sanatorium emptied, patients fleeing to their homelands. Hans, too, descended, not as a patient, but as a soldier. On a muddy battlefield, he ran through smoke and shells, his fate uncertain. The mountain, with its fevers, debates, and loves, faded like a dream. Had it taught him wisdom, or merely stolen his years? As he stumbled forward, a psalm from his youth, Schubert's Lindenbaum, rose in his mind, a fragile thread of hope amid the chaos. Hans Castorp's journey on the Magic Mountain was not just a physical sojourn, but a descent into the depths of human experience. The sanatorium, with its routines and isolation, stripped away the flatland certainties, exposing Hans to the interplay of body and soul, reason and passion. Mann's novel, through Hans, explores the tension between life's vitality and its fragility, the allure of death and the pull of progress. The mountain, a microcosm of Europe on the brink of collapse, mirrors the intellectual and spiritual currents of its time. Settembrini's Enlightenment ideals, Naphta's dark mysticism, Clavdia's enigmatic sensuality, and Peperkorn's raw existence. Hans's love for Clavdia, rooted in a boyhood memory, symbolizes his yearning for the ineffable, the irrational forces that defy his engineer's logic. The sanatorium's timelessness, its distortion of days into years, reflects man's meditation on time itself, how it shapes, erodes, and transforms. Hans's illness, ambiguous and never fully debilitating, becomes a metaphor for his surrender to the mountain's introspective pull, a choice to linger in contemplation rather than act in the world below. The debates between Settembrini and Naphta frame the novel's philosophical core, the struggle between humanism and nihilism, progress and regression. Hans, neither fully swayed by one nor the other, embodies the modern soul's indecision, caught between ideals and instincts. The war's outbreak, shattering the sanatorium's cocoon, forces Hans back to reality. His fate left open, a question mark on whether his time on the mountain was a preparation for life or a retreat from it.